You're listening to The Jake Asman Show on the SportsMap Radio Network.
Presented by Rocket Mortgage.
Live from the O'Reilly Auto Parts Studios, here's Jake Asman.
800-224-2004 is the number to get involved and weigh in. Coming up at 40 past the hour, Colt Thompson from Sports Illustrated in his weekly spot, talking all things NFL with Cole. Here's the question I have this morning to start us off. Who is the MFer that Tom Brady is talking about? If you missed it yesterday, HBO's The Shop put out a teaser trailer for their next episode, and Tom Brady is on the episode. And in the trailer, you get about 5 seconds of Tom Brady talking about his free agency from over a year ago. This was Brady in that snippet in the trailer.
One of the teams, and they weren't interested at the very end. I was thinking, you're sticking with that mother.
So that, like 5 seconds, not even, caused a lot of people to start speculating. Who's Tom Brady referring to? And I think it's rather obvious the team and the player that he's referring to. It's Jimmy Garoppolo. It's the 49ers. Clearly, it has to be the 49ers. Brady was clearly upset that his hometown team was sticking with a guy that Brady knew he was better than, right? Brady was obviously in New England with Jimmy G, essentially got Jimmy G dealt to the 49ers. There's certainly no love lost between Brady and Garoppolo if you read through a lot of the tea leaves of what came down following that trade a couple of years ago. Brady has no reason to call Mitch Trubisky an MFer. He has no reason to call Derek Carr an MFer, Jared Goff an MFer. He's specifically referring to Jimmy Garoppolo. When does Tom Brady ever say anything close to something like that? He doesn't. He has to be referring to the Niners sticking with Jimmy G. Because if you remember, early on in the Brady free agent process over a year ago now, there was a report that came out that Brady's preference was to play for the 49ers. But the 49ers never came close to making a real offer. And notice the quote. One of the teams, they weren't interested at the very end. The Niners thought better of it at the, quote, very end. It has to be Jimmy G and the Niners. What other team could it be? Read the tea leaves. If he's not referring to Jimmy G, you really think it's Mitch Trubisky or Derek Carr? There's no way he's referring to either one of those guys as MFers. He has a relationship with Garoppolo. He knows he's better than Garoppolo. He was fired up that New England and Belichick thought that it was time to move on from him to go to Jimmy Garoppolo in 2017. Ron, it is clearly Jimmy G in that clip that Tom Brady's referring to as a MFer.
No, I could definitely see that. I'm going to offer up another one for you because it's another quarterback that he would know very, very well as well, having played against him at least 2 times a year for a bunch of years leading up to it. And it was a team that was really, really interested in him. And they hadn't really made a decision on who their quarterback was going to be. And that's Ryan Tannehill and the Titans.
Were the Titans interested in
Yes,
Tom
they were.
Brady?
They were interested in Tom Brady during that time. But then they decided to go with Tannehill. I think it was a little bit cheaper. I'm not really sure. All that went into it. I think maybe it was because, well, he's already ingrained in the system. He had a good year. But that was another team that Brady was very interested in because you got a lot of young receivers, and you probably had arguably one of the better running backs in the league right now.
Well, what's interesting, too, is if you remember, there was a lot of question marks with Tom Brady's free agency over a year ago. In hindsight, it's easy for everyone to be like, hadn't every team signed Tom Brady? But I'll be fair here. Tom Brady was coming off a year in New England where, statistically speaking, his numbers were down. He did not play well in that playoff game, that wild card weekend game, that Saturday night special against the Tennessee Titans. And in the past, when Bill Belichick has moved on from players, he's usually been right as far as letting guys walk at the right time, right? It's better to let a guy walk a year too soon than a year too late. It was always the Patriot philosophy. So in hindsight, we could sit here and say, oh, how wasn't every team in on Tom Brady? But people looked at Belichick moving on from arguably the greatest quarterback of all time. And that's why, there was some doubt on whether or not, Brady could still play at a Brady level. Now, let's be honest, though. He's still Tom Brady, and we all should have known better to doubt that guy.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, if you're ranking a list of teams that regret not signing Tom Brady, I think at the top of that list is the team that I believe Brady's referring to in that clip.
And I will say this. I mean, I'm just throwing out the, dark horses, with the Ryan Tannehill. Another dark horse for me is Tyrod Taylor, because the Chargers said they wanted to go with him first, and that would be another one that I can see Brady saying that about. But the funny one, the one where it's in that context where it's making fun of the situation and being humorous, I'm with you thinking that it's the ex-porn star's boyfriend.
It is 100% of my mind.
Or the porn star's ex-boyfriend.
The San Francisco 49ers. Has to be. Now, real quick, Ron, as a Charger fan, here's a scenario I have for you. Would you rather have 3 years of Tom Brady, and you get the Tom Brady we just saw in Tampa, right? So hindsight's 2020. You can now know that Brady's going to have, at the minimum.
You're going to paint the picture. Everything I know about what happened this past year,
yes.
Where would I lean?
Yes, you get, but here's the scenario, right? So you get 3 guaranteed years of Brady.
Right.
Or you take Justin Herbert in the draft and everything plays out like it has.
Yeah, I like the Justin Herbert playing out as it is, because listen, he could sit behind the greatest of all time.
You don't draft Herbert.
We don't draft Herbert.
The scenario is
forget that then.
Brady's your quarterback for the next 3 years.
Why can't I draft Herbert and have Tom Brady?
Because,
why can't I have my cake and eat it too?
Because if you had Herbert, you wouldn't be taking him 6th overall. If you had Brady, you'd be taking a player at 6 that can help Tom Brady win a championship in year 1 with the Chargers.
Yeah, no, I'd rather stick with Herbert.
It's an interesting call. You could argue.
You know what it reminds me of? An old radio bit years ago when LeBron was young, fresh in the league, and this used to play around in LA a lot. Would you trade Kobe Bryant straight up for LeBron James? LeBron was probably like 3 years into the league at the time. Kobe Bryant, like 13, 14 years in the league at the time? Would you trade Kobe Bryant then straight up for LeBron James then?
Any Laker fan that said no is lying to themselves.
That's what the argument was. That's what we all would say. Is like, you would, because you're going to choose youth, more years.
You have to.
More years of success. Come on, guys.
And LeBron does more to impact the game than Kobe ever did. Sorry. It's not even like a knock on Kobe. Kobe to me is a top 10 player of all time. LeBron's either 1 or 2, depending on who you want to argue with.
But the larger picture is, I would rather have Justin Herbert now than 3 Super Bowl winning years with Tom Brady, because I think there's more upside with Justin Herbert.
See, that's the thing, though. It's like if you get Brady, like there's no guarantee you win the Super Bowl, but you get 3 years of a guy that's going to give you 40-plus touchdowns, the leadership, the intangibles. He's going to elevate your whole roster. Everything we just saw with Tampa. It's an interesting question. I think I'm with you, though. If I'm the Chargers, I'm happy with how it played out. I will settle for Justin Herbert, who I think could now be, a great quarterback in this league for 15 years, let's say. So
Fingers
I'm with
crossed.
you there. Here's the question I have, though. Which team regrets not signing Tom Brady the most? I mentioned it was the 49ers. To me, it's without a doubt the Niners. If the Niners had signed Tom Brady, obviously this past year they were marred with injuries. Who knows if that would have still been the case? But if they have Brady on that team, are they not contending for the Super Bowl? Like, does Tom Brady not elevate that entire roster? You put Brady with Kyle Shanahan calling the plays, Robert Saleh still coordinating that defense this past year. Because that's the thing. The Niners went 6-10 this past year, and that was despite losing Bosa. That was despite losing Garoppolo and losing Kittle for game. Like, everyone on that team was hurt, and they
did it with a Nick Mullins and a Beathard,
CJ Beathard, and they were still
Beater
in all these games and won 6 of them. It has to be the Niners. If you're pointing to one team that had the opportunity to go back in time, change what they did a year ago, re-sign Tom Brady, team 1 has got to be the Niners. Team 2 has to be the Bears, right? I mean, they tried the Nick Foles thing, didn't work. We'll go back to Trubisky. Tom Brady's on the Bears. They're better than an 8-win football team. They're probably at least 10-6, 11-5. I think the Bears have to be kicking themselves that they weren't more aggressive to try and get TB12 in to play quarterback for them. At the same time, you know what Brady deserves credit for? Signing with the Bucs. Remember at the time people were like, he's going to go to Tampa Bay? Yeah, he's going to go there because he trusts the coach. And he looks at the offensive weapons he has and goes, yeah, that team is going to be outstanding for me. You know, sometimes the moves you don't make are better than the moves you make. Like Brady had a bunch of options. He could have forced his way to certain teams. End of the day, Tampa Bay made the most sense for him. And Brady made the most sense for Tampa Bay. So it worked out. But it is funny hearing Tom Brady refer to someone as an MFer because you don't get that from Tom Brady. He's very guarded. Usually doesn't say a whole lot. Interesting that he's referring to a quarterback on another team as an MFer. More evidence that it has to be Garoppolo because he's the guy that he had the rivalry with, had the relationship with, and essentially forced a trade of Jimmy G to the Niners back in 2017. Agree or disagree? Which player is Brady referring to? That he's saying you're, quote, sticking with that MFer? You can comment your thoughts on either Facebook or Twitch, or I'm on Twitter at Jake Asman. That's JakeAsman. Plenty still to get into on the show this morning. Did you hear Sean Marks' press conference yesterday? The Nets general manager. He refused to call the Nets season a failure. Is he right? We'll talk about the end of the line for the Brooklyn Nets coming up next here on the Jake Asman Show.
The Jake Asman Show.
First thing first, why does LeBron always